Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to this Mail Manager webinar, which is going to focus on Microsoft Teams as a topic. I'll run through the agenda shortly, but yeah, firstly, just wanted to thank you all for taking time out of your day to attend this. If there's those of you, I'm sure lots of you will be working from home and be juggling the prospect of work with potential homeschooling as well. So I hope the next kind of half an hour or so provides some really actionable content as well as welcome respite. So in terms of our speaker for today, it's Tom Arbuthnot, who, well, Tom, it's probably better if you kind of introduce who you are and what you do for those attending today.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jacob. Yeah, so I work for a company called Modality Systems and focus mostly personally on Microsoft Teams. We do the whole Microsoft 365 modern workplace stack. So lots of experience deploying what was OCS, Link, Skype, and now in more recent years, Teams, anywhere from a few thousand seats to hundreds of thousands of seats at the high end.
Thanks, Tom. And for those, there'll be many on here who this may be your first kind of time attending a webinar from Mail Manager. Thank you, obviously, for coming on. And if you've attended it, if this isn't your first one, then hopefully you'll see a theme of us delivering some really actionable and useful content. And it's great to see so many people register. I think we've got 300 attending today, so it's really clear that Microsoft Teams is something we're either, or whether we're enjoying it, struggling with it, or wherever we are on that kind of spectrum, it's become a really fundamental part of our working lives now. So the agenda for today is to, Tom's going to take us through his thoughts, I suppose, really on helping you understand what is Microsoft Teams for your organization. I think obviously that lots of us have probably seen that change, since we've all started working from home towards the end of March in the UK. Anyway, we're then going to talk through, I suppose, the two different audiences in terms of the challenges which Microsoft Teams presents from an end user's perspective, as well as from an IT operational kind of director's perspective. And then finally, we're going to end with some actionable steps you can take right now. The kind of link to the Mail Manager's link into that is to talk about the role email plays with Microsoft Teams, which we'll come on to. But Tom's also got some really helpful insights and advice for anyone, whether you're in an end user camp and you're just trying to get more out of Teams and trying to become more productive, kind of get an advantage that way, or if you're an IT team and are thinking, well, how can we kind of get the most out of our investment in Office 365? So in terms of, I suppose, just briefly to set the scene a little bit, we did a webinar on Teams in I think it was May time, and saw obviously a massive interest in people just trying to learn a bit more about how to use it beyond just a kind of conference meetings facility. And I think actually we've all probably been a little bit surprised by A, how much we're using it, but B, kind of what we're actually using it for. I know I spoke to lots of IT directors and lots of IT managers who, before Teams was introduced, I think it was kind of seen as a silver bullet to all of our information management queries and challenges in the past, and it was going to get rid of email, potentially completely. But I think what we're actually seeing is there's a new normal when it comes to communication, and we're using Teams for some types of communication and we're using email for other types of communication, but we're probably seeing an increase in both of those things. So I can definitely speak for myself in saying I'm receiving more Teams messages than ever was, as well as more emails than ever was, probably more WhatsApps and that kind of thing as well. So we'll talk through today, I suppose, how to get some sort of order to the chaos, because I think for some people and for lots of people it can be really kind of a little bit overwhelming when you're living in Teams all day, when it comes to getting notifications about absolutely everything. I think we've probably all, Tom and I were discussing off air, the consequences of kind of over scheduling, and we probably all feel like if we're not on a Teams call, that's a little bit of a strange feeling. So we're going to talk through today, I suppose, the common pitfalls and mistakes people kind of can fall into, and traps people can fall into when it comes to I suppose just falling into bad habits in terms of using Microsoft Teams. But then importantly, what's your kind of team strategy in terms of getting the best usage and the best adoption and the best value out of it, which Tom can Tom can take us through, excuse me. Just one bit of housekeeping. There's a Q&A feature through the Zoom window. It's probably better to put your questions through the chat one though. So just to check all of that's working, I'm going to put a message into the chat window and put hi everyone, and if you can respond just by saying hi everyone. If you put your questions into there as we go through the webinar, that'd be much appreciated. If it's a real quick one which we can just easily answer in kind of 30 seconds, we'll answer that as we go through, but for the majority of questions we'll pick them off to answer at the end. So Tom, over to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, as Jacob said, we'd love to hear your questions. Just fire them in as we go. We might pepper a couple in, but we've got some time at the end for questions. So I think to level set, and this is probably the most important question, is what is Microsoft Teams for your organization? So by now you will have heard the pitch. I mean, Microsoft are really banging the drum for Teams. The daily active user numbers are through the roof. Microsoft talk about Teams as this hub for teamwork. So it's chat, it's calls, it's meetings, but it also has integration with other Office 365 apps, things like Planner and SharePoint. It can extend to third-party apps, business processes, and obviously you've got the Microsoft 365 enterprise security and compliance. And that's a real differentiator against other collaborative platforms. Is there's so much investment in Microsoft in security, identity, compliance. It's a really strong feature. But I mean, that's kind of a bit pitchy. Really, you can think about Teams as 5 kind of major features. So collaborative workspaces where you come together, work out loud, you have channels with chat content, you might have tabs with apps in there, you may have bots in there, you'll have files in there. So a space to work together on a project or a common goal. You've got online meetings, which is obviously the thing that everybody is familiar with, particularly now in lockdown times around the world. Joining, having desktop sharing, having screen sharing, having video, that kind of thing. You've got private chat, so 2 or more people having a kind of informal chat, kind of a la Apple messaging, iMessaging, or WhatsApp, that kind of thing, but in a secure corporate way. Obviously, voice and video direct calling. And finally, it can be a legit phone system with a phone number, with physical IP phones or headsets. So those are all features and they're all options. Your organization doesn't have to do all of them. And indeed, you may be somewhere on a journey where you started with needing online meetings at scale because everybody suddenly was remote working. Private chat, it tends to get adopted by default. You maybe are trying to be more collaborative. That's a common goal for many of the organizations I'm working with, is being more collaborative. And maybe you're looking at decomming an old phone system and adopting Teams. So you have to think carefully about what is Teams for your organization and how does that influence how you advise, train, coach your users on how they can get the most out of Teams. So when you're answering this question, it's normally going to be more than just, hey, welcome to Teams, you can do calls, meetings, and collaboration in here. You want to be saying to your organization, and maybe it's the whole org, or maybe it's parts of the organization, we're deploying Teams because our goal is to have more engaging meetings, or it's to collaborate closer together. And collaboration, we'll talk about a lot in this webinar. That's the point of Teams where you can have the greatest power to have a positive influence for people, have them working out loud, have them working together. But it's also the biggest cultural change. So people are super used to email, they're super used to attaching files, they're less used to all working out loud. Like, I just share my drafts with my team, my boss and my subordinates, and everybody can see my PowerPoint and they can all comment on it in real time. That can be quite a cultural shift for lots of organizations. And some of the questions that come up are, how is that sharing managed? So things like public teams and private teams. What data is appropriate to be in Teams? What data isn't appropriate to be in Teams? How do I manage and wrap up that data at the end of a project? Who's responsible for third parties like external guests coming to Teams? So these are subjects we'll touch on in this webinar. So first off, we're going to look at end user challenges and how you can avoid them. I've picked out some typical end user challenges that come up time and time again. There's probably more than this, but these are some top ones and my recommendations around them. Then we'll flip over to some more, if you're the service owner or the IT team or an IT manager, how you can do some system-wide things that will help you. So first off, when to use private chat and when to use team or channel chat. This is really, really common. People, if you don't guide them, they tend to fall towards private chat because it's a very understood paradigm. If you've got iMessage or WhatsApp or Signal or any of those type of applications, you're used to a group chat. So that tends to be a common paradigm people get. General rule of thumb is when you're using something that you want to stick around for a longer period of time, it's related to a project, other people could gain value from the history of that communications, then you're probably looking more towards having a team, which brings a group of people together in a dedicated workspace. They can also bring files into that workspace, they can also bring apps into that workspace. So anytime it's more of a project, it's probably more geared towards team or channel messaging. And if it's ad hoc conversation, it might not go anywhere. Here's an idea I want to share with 3 or 4 people. That's probably private chat. There's no easy way to migrate a private chat conversation to a channel chat or vice versa. But something we often empower users to do is say, it's okay to be the person that says, hey, this private chat really relates to a project, we should go and have the conversation over here. Or hey, this private chat's been going for 2 weeks. This is a project now. We should move into a project. So be sure to coach your users a little bit about the use cases there. Another super common one is when you create a new team, there's 2 options. It can either be public or private. And users often get confused about what these things mean. So public doesn't mean anyone outside your organization. It means public within your organization. I'm not in love with the phraseology there because public sounds like on the internet, but really public is just anybody in your org can join at any time. And private is the owner of the team admits people into the team. So it's a gated closed office, if you like, and you have to knock to be approved to come into the project room, that kind of thing. General rule of thumb is private teams for anything that's should be a limited audience, is controlled data, any customer data, any sensitive data. You don't want anybody to just join or leave that team if it has that data. Public is really suitable to things that are non-sensitive, so like a hobbies group, a sports team, a socializing area, or just things that are relevant to everybody in the organization that there's no sensitivity to. A challenge we often see is lots and lots of public teams with customer client confidential data in. General rules of thumb, things like HIPAA and ISO would say minimum viable access to that data. So a general thing to look out for is it should be private if in doubt and public by exception. Jacob touched on this one really early on, and yeah, I think from a user training point of view, this is one of the most important, is teams can generate a lot of notifications. You get notified if a channel is mentioned that you're a member of, you get notified if you get personally mentioned. So if someone puts an @ in your name, you'll get notifications for private messages, you'll get obviously notifications for calls, missed calls, and it can get pretty noisy without taming it down. Fortunately, there's lots of tuning you can do. So you can tune your notifications at a global level. So for example, I have lots of my notifications to banner and feed, but I don't want a toast message and I don't want an email. I'm in Teams all day, every day. I don't need Teams to email me to tell me there's a message in Teams. So I would tune mine down there. But you can also tune your alerts down at the individual team and chat level. So you can mute specific chats and you can go into Teams and you can say, I don't want to be alerted on this channel or this team as well. So it's worth training your users to have a little bit of time to understand, oh, I can turn a lot of this stuff off, particularly if you're trying to get Teams to be a de facto place to work from. If you're going to be in it every day anyway, there's this really great activity feed that tells you what's going on, that you can filter by mentions, you can filter by unread, you can filter by reply. So this activity feed is almost like your inbox in an email world. This is a great place to start and say, hey, where have I been mentioned recently? What do I need to catch up on? That kind of thing. So really worth spending some time on helping people understand how they can tune notifications. And this one came up as one of the hot topics in the mail merge kind of customer base and communities, when to use Teams and when to use SharePoint. Now, it's a funny question because Teams relies on SharePoint. All the file collaboration in Teams is actually based on SharePoint. If you're sharing files in private chat on Teams, that's OneDrive. OneDrive is effectively SharePoint. But what this question usually means is, when should I use a SharePoint website, an intranet, a project site, and when should I use a team? And Microsoft are very big on Teams at the moment. So whatever your question is, their answer is Teams. And I like Teams, so I would lean that way as well. But there are really good use cases for a SharePoint site that isn't a team. So for example, if you're sharing lots of static reference content, there's no need to have collaborative chat around it. The content is not changing. That's a SharePoint site. That's not a team. If you're maybe having a project that in no way relates to Teams, like it's just file editing for whatever reason, they're not going to use a team, then maybe a SharePoint collaboration site is better. But our general rule of thumb would be, if you're collaborating, if you're working together, it's Teams. If it's static content, or it's your intranet, or it's your employee handbook, that's not a Teams thing, that's a SharePoint thing. Interested if anybody's got any questions around that or any edge cases, because that does come up a lot. But just know that when you create a team, you get a SharePoint site as part of that team. So if you want things like a SharePoint list, or you want to do fancy things around file storage, you're getting all of that within Teams whenever you create a team. Oh yeah, this is a good note. Coming soon, there is going to be a SharePoint app in Teams that will bring your SharePoint internet directly into Teams. So this screenshot is of file sharing, but you'll be able to bring in the actual intranet site into Teams as an app, so you don't even have to leave Teams for SharePoint. That's a whistle-stop tour of some user advice. I just wanted to land on the user side. Teams adoption doesn't just happen. You need a program, you need people who are dedicated to training, looking at the adoption metrics to understand, are people using collaboration, are people using video calling, and your adoption needs a management program around it to help people get the most out of Teams. So people will also adopt meetings for sure, because the meeting turns up in your diary, you have to click it. People will pretty much auto adopt chat because they're used to needing to chat to people. But if you want people to get the most out of collaboration, working together, projects, apps, you certainly need a bit of user adoption training. Okay, so that's some tips for the user side. Now, I know some of the audience are more on the IT management, IT operations side. So here's some considerations for operations that really heavily impact how users experience and perceive and get the value out of Teams. So we're going to go through controlling creation, guests, app management, and the whole team lifecycle. So this is probably number one question for lots of customers going into Teams is, oh my goodness, we're going to have 1 million teams, everybody's going to create a team, it's going to be really sprawly. We need to lock it down, we need people to fill in forms about why they want teams and what they're going to do with it. And it's a classic IT response, like the command and control, carefully manage resources. It's not super applicable for the modern way of working. I would say that there are use cases to lock down teams, particularly if you have very sensitive data. But generally speaking, if you're controlling creation of teams and you're not enabling users to get their work done, they will maybe flip to other tools. So you have shadow IT problems. They will use private chat in place of a team because they can spin up a private chat instantly. And we see this in the user stats. If team creation is locked down, you end up with private chats with like 50 people in, with files in, editing like it should be a team. Microsoft don't make it easy to disable team creation. If you disable team creation, you're disabling group creation. So you mean you're disabling group creation for Yammer, for SharePoint, for Planner, for anything on Office 365. There are some third-party tools, and we have one, there are others that can manage the creation process, have two-step approval, have certain people allowed to create teams and not other people. So there are ways around this, but my general preference would be let users create teams, but then manage the creation process, and we'll talk on. So let them create it, do what they want to do. When it gets created, then you can go to them and say, hey, these are our best practices. This should be public, this should be private rather than public. Your naming convention's not quite right here. That tends to help with adoption more than just closing the door, pushing them to a ServiceNow form and saying, hey, fill in these 20 fields to get a team, that kind of thing. Another one that comes up that is a top conversation is guests and guest access. So guests, external people, can absolutely come into teams. If you're enabled for guests at the Active Directory level and you're enabled for guests at the Teams level, so there's 2 levels of authorization there, then by default, any owner of a team can just add somebody with an Office 365 or a live identity and add them to the team. It can be disabled by team based sensitivity labels, and it can be managed if you're AD Premium with what are called access reviews. You as an IT org absolutely need to have a stance on this and a policy and a procedure. This is letting external people into teams that have data. It's often glossed over at the moment because it's such a useful feature, but there needs to be some management here, whether it's the Microsoft tools again or third party. But be aware, like, enabling guest access doesn't suddenly remove your need to consider things like ISO and GDPR and discovery and audit logs and things. So think carefully about which teams have guests enabled and who's accountable and responsible for those guests. Apps is another big one. People love the ability to bring their own apps into teams. So you can tab, obviously, the Microsoft native apps, things like Planner, SharePoint, but you can also bring in third-party apps, and there's a whole app store with lots of different apps in. Things like Trello are super popular. Be aware that just bringing those apps into teams doesn't mean they're automatically in line with the compliance policies of your organization. So it's almost like using an app on the internet. So think carefully about which apps you're approving your users to use. And there's a weird dynamic here around, they could obviously go and open up a browser and potentially load any app up, but then they're going off to do that themselves out of band. But if you present the app as available in Teams, our IT blessing that app as being approved, lots of users will take the stance of, they gave me Teams had Trello in, so therefore I can use Trello. If that's not the case for your org, for compliance or security or whatever other reason, you just want people to use the native experience, you can turn on or off apps at the org-wide level, and you can turn on or off individual apps at the user level. So something people that are more sensitive to this area might do is turn off lots of third-party apps at the org level and then selectively enable them at the user level. So if there's a person with a use case for app 1 or app 2 or app 3, then they can use it. Or if you're a bit more open, you can enable all the apps, but then audit which apps are being used and coach users as to, actually, we're not sure about this app or that app, we're going to block it for these reasons. 2 different approaches, but again, just have an approach. And probably the most important one is team or group, because teams are groups, lifecycle and data management. So teams get created, there are owners of those teams, there's data in those teams. You need to consider what's the lifecycle of that information, both the chat, because the chat is data, but also the files that end up in that team. Is there a requirement for you to legally retain some of that data? Is there a requirement for you to legally delete some of that data after a certain amount of time? If you're working with customer or client information, how do you deal with discovery if they do an information request, that kind of thing? In the box, there's lots of good options. So Office 365 Groups has an expiry policy where it will automatically email owners to say, hey, this team hasn't been used in X time, you need to renew it or it gets deleted. I mentioned earlier the access reviews to manage guest access and membership. The Office 365 audit log is a bit of a beast, but it has pretty much every event in Office 365, so creation, deletion, membership changes, things like that. So there is the ability to audit all those events. The biggest thing is considering end of life. It's easy to create teams. It's very hard to get owners to take accountability for, the project is finished, where does this data go? Does it get deleted? Does it get archived? And the default human behavior thing is to want to leave everything hanging around just in case. So as an IT org, you need to combat that, not just because of a security and compliance reason, but also if you have hundreds and hundreds of teams and they're all unused, the user experience gets not very good because there's a dozen teams about projects that are already closed. And again, it will drive people back to, I'll just create an ad hoc private chat. I won't use a team because who knows which team I'm supposed to use. So there are some tips on the IT kind of admin side. A little plug for something my company does. So we have a product called Teamwork Analytics, and that is pulling all the data out of Microsoft Graph about teams and setting up automation triggers around it. So some of the things I talked about today, things like managing guest access, knowing if people are having performance calls or meetings, pinging users best practice for adoption. So things like, hey, we've noticed you're joining lots of meetings, but you're not using collaboration. Please consider using collaboration. Those are all things we can automate. That there's plenty in the box in terms of Microsoft. So by all means, look at that stuff first, but there are third-party options out there. So that's a bit of a whistle stop in 20 minutes, but hopefully it gives you some value for thinking about how you can train and help your end users, and also on the IT admin system side, how you can help those users have a good experience. My 3 takeaways for you are, first of all, you need to understand what's going on in your environment. Look at the Teams Admin Center, look at Microsoft's Call Quality Dashboard to see how Teams is being used today. Is it being used the way you think it is? Which departments are using it? Which people are using it? Are they just doing meetings or are they actually collaborating? Second thing is you can use a lot of PowerShell commands. I've linked a really good script there to understand and audit your team's environment. So how many teams have you got? How many don't have any ownership? How many don't have any members? How many have been abandoned in terms of activity? Get a good understanding of what your current estate is. And last one is understanding those guests. So most customers have guest access turned on. Most customers don't have a great handle on who the guests are, which domains are in the tenant, which teams are they in, who's accountable, responsible for the activity of those guests during their stay at our tenants. So I've linked off to one of my scripts there. You can quickly audit all the external accounts in your teams and see where they are, which domains are popular, that kind of thing. So with that, I'll hand over to Jacob, who I think is going to take you through some of the email integration teams that they have.
Thanks very much, Tom. Really helpful. I think, especially the point. I mean, you made a number of points I haven't really considered before, but I think so a couple which will definitely resonate is the data retention sort of policy, because I think we all kind of think of Teams as a bit like WhatsApp for work, maybe. Well, so some people may, and I think that is very relevant. I mean, what would you say are the sort of 1 or 2 most common questions you get asked, but the 1 or 2 kind of real head scratchers you get from people you talk to?
Yeah, to be honest, most of them don't hinge around technical questions. They're more about adoption questions, like we're ingrained in these business processes. How do we help users get the most out of Teams? So on that is by far the number 1 thing, is how do we get people out of the habits that they had of old school working, not co-editing, not sharing content, into a world where we're all happy working together out loud. It's easy to say, but culturally it's quite tough to do.
That's true. And do you think it's kind of made people rethink how they kind of organise their information, generally, whereas maybe before it might have been a bit more scattered about, or less?
Yeah, I guess it's pros and cons. Like traditionally, you probably had lots of orgs that thought they had a really managed data hierarchy, like they'd have the SharePoint site and they'd have all the systems, but realistically lots of stuff was on local OneDrives or file shares and shared through email. So in some ways I think it's getting better, but you could also argue Teams has made it worse because anybody can spin up a team at any time and share files in it, so you get lots of multiple versions and team stuff. That I'd say net there's more to manage now, not less.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that brings us really nicely on to the next to this topic, which I'll spend about 5 minutes talking about, which is really the case to bring email into Teams. So, Tom, you should be seeing a bringing email into Teams slide. If you can't, then
yep,
let me know. So, in terms of, I suppose, what we see happening with email at the moment, and particularly within Arup, I think pre-Teams there was lots of inboxes with thousands of emails in, and that probably hasn't changed realistically. But what we do see is the types of correspondence being used and the types of emails being written are slightly different. And if anything, email's gone from kind of being an informal form of communication to probably being the most formal form of communication we use. It's kind of a letter of today. If you want to confirm something and confirm you've agreed something, you're probably not likely to put that in a WhatsApp message or a text or a Teams message. You're probably likely to put that in an email. And we still see lots and lots of businesses struggling to get their employees to file the important and sensitive information in a responsible way. We're a company which was effectively created because people get frustrated at the amount of emails which are unfiled, as well as the kind of chaos in people's inboxes. And I think that still remains. It's probably just the emails in there, whether there's more or less, the ones in there are just as formal, if not more, than they were. I think the other thing which we're definitely seeing, and it has definitely been a push within Arup to get more out of SharePoint and more out of Office 365 as a platform, but I suppose to use this current situation and the current kind of increase in adoption of Teams as an opportunity to consolidate how correspondence is organized. So 12 months ago would have been really normal to have a project site with not a great deal in it. I think personally, probably a lot of it was still stored on a file server, and lots and lots of inboxes with thousands of emails. And now this, because of how we're using Teams so much, it represents an opportunity to really think, well, how can we get all of our information into one place? How can we get Teams messages into one place? And how can we get our emails into one place as well? So part of our drive has been to kind of get email filed into project sites effectively, but still in a way which means people can send and receive through Outlook in their kind of normal way. Interested to hear about anyone's kind of filing habits, and I suppose if you're experiencing the opposite to this, and if emails completely disappeared for you, and there's not a need to file, then love to hear that as well. So I'm just going to briefly show how to file correspondence into Teams, through Mail Manager into Teams. So I'm just going to bring my inbox over here very quickly. So you should see my inbox here, which has got about 19 or so emails in it. Now I've got a number of different emails I could pick on. It's important to mention that Mail Manager as a solution is an Outlook add-in which sits inside Outlook, and it doesn't just file to SharePoint or just file through Teams. Our clients use SharePoint, Teams, a file server. They may even use some other cloud document storage for other requirements as well. So it's perfectly normal to have some projects in SharePoint and some projects on a server, and to be sometimes filing to more than one place. But in terms of how to get emails in and filed, now most of the time people will have some folders set up under their inbox, and I'm sure there'll be a good percentage of our audience here today who have got an inbox with different folders set up to, I suppose, which they've designed themselves, and which have probably just evolved organically over time, and now represents a perfect opportunity to just think about what's the best way to organize this stuff. What's the best way to set up my notifications? What's the best way to organize my inbox, particularly from a kind of data retention and a legality point of view? Because if these emails are important, then by the time we're kind of looking for them, it's a bit too late to wish for that they were filed. So anyway, so in terms of actually filing stuff, we've got a number of options. I can right click on an email here, and Mail Manager will just suggest to me some places to file this email into. Now I've got a general area here. I've got a Microsoft team which I can just show you here, which is Mail Manager All Users, and a team called General, and within that an email folder where emails can go to. So, but the important thing is that for me as somebody using Outlook and using Mail Manager is telling me where I think this email should be filed, and it's doing that based on where I file emails from this person, as well as the content of the message as well. So there's machine learning which is picking up on your behaviors all of the time to help automate where you may want to file something. If I go to an email here from a recruitment firm which we're working with and right click here, I've got some different suggestions, one of which is Pareto, which happens to be where Bethan works. So those suggestions are always getting smarter the more and more I file effectively. So number of ways to file. The one I've just shown you is probably something which I reckon most of your user base wouldn't do. Okay, because it relies on you, it relies on us to remember to do something. And like, we'd all like to get to the end of Friday and file our emails maybe, but it just doesn't happen. So what we've done is we've developed the ability to open up an email. Apologies, just gone to my other screen. So when you're opening or responding to an email, I'm able to click close, and then I get a prompt which says, well, where do you want to file this message to? And I've got a number of different options to file to. I've got file servers here where it says 28 Hands Business, but then I've also got the option to file to this this team which I've got, which is Mail Manager General. So if I click File, it's going to file that message. It's still going to be in my inbox for me to dip in and out of and search, but importantly, it's now filed in an area which everybody who's allowed access can go and see. So if I go into this area in Teams now, I'll see the email from Chris, which has just been filed there. Now I can still access.
That's the really cool bit, I think.
Sorry,
So for example, we use one team per customer at Modality. Every one of our customers has a team. That's where conversations live. But yeah, we see this challenge. If one person, like the account manager, is having the conversation with the customer, you have to constantly be looping them back in. If a new person joins the project, it would be great to be able to access that email history as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go to, I suppose explain those suggestions again, I'm just going to send my colleague Chris an email. I'm going to press send here. I'm going to get a prompt on the outgoing email. And that's really important because we think that most people, even if you're really diligent at filing, you probably don't file your sent emails. Even if you've got a nice tidy inbox, your sent items is always going to be kind of I don't know what the phrase is, overflowing with stuff. So here, when I press send, I've got a prompt which says, well, you last filed an email to Chris into this Mail Manager team, and that Mail Manager could be a project, it could be a customer, it could be a client, because I've then got, as I can show you here, other options which are other clients we're working with. So this is really looking at where you're filing information to and suggesting that there. So it could be you'd have a list of client folders to file to, a list of project folders, or if you're in like a finance team or a business support function, you're filing to just non-project folders basically. Mail Manager's learning your behaviors, and it's just putting those options at the top of the list. But the most important thing here is actually prompting people to go and do something, make a decision, file it or don't file it. And it's easier to file than not to file, which is probably the biggest step change for a business, because most of the time it's easier not to file than it is to file. So if I click send and file there, just one thing finally to touch on, I'm going to file this message from Matthew Barker, who is a recruitment firm which we work with, and I'm going to say, thanks, Matt. When I click send, now we have developed the ability to file messages as a 2-for-1. So what that means is when I respond to an email, it's going to file the message I'm sending as well as the one I'm responding. So that means just by replying to your emails, your filing's done for you. So I'm going to file this message back to Matt, click send, and it's gone and filed that message. Now, if anyone's wondering where that email's gone, you've got a number of options. You can just keep the email in your inbox, completely fine, no problem. I've decided to set up a separate filed items area where everything gets moved to once it's filed. So if I click there, I've got a list of all of the emails which are filed, and it says the date and time when that email has been filed, basically. The benefit, I suppose, as an individual just means that your inbox becomes a bit of a to-do list of stuff you haven't read or haven't actioned, and your filed items is stuff which you have looked at. And then again, importantly, just when we're looking in a Microsoft team here, if I click on the folder, I've got the different emails which have been filed there, which I can go and access. Now, just finally, the search is probably the kind of benefit to you on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you're working at the top of a business, you want everybody to be filing responsibly. If you're running a project, you want everybody to be filing responsibly. But it's important as an end user, especially if you're kind of in a fee earning role, it's really important that you actually get some time back in your day. So for years, we know that people have only been able to access their own emails at one time. They haven't been able to search for all emails across a project or across a client. So I've opened up the search here, which has got 307,000 emails there. So I'm not included in all of them. They're just ones which I'm looking for, basically. So and they're all emails filed against any project, any folder I'm looking at. So if I go and type
Jacob,
in,
there's been a question in the chat.
yeah, sure.
Does it file the attachments as well as the email?
Yes, absolutely, can do. Yes, it's or you can decide to put the attachments into another place. If you receive an invoice and you want to put that into invoices and the email into email messages, then that's possible as well. That's really down to the, I suppose, the company's kind of preference. Good question. Just finally, in terms of a search, I've got 300,000 emails here. I'm going to search for something. I'm going to type in groundwork, and then it's going to take me down to just a couple of emails. I'm just going to move this Zoom window here, which is in a slightly annoying place, I must say. Hang on. There we go. So it's gone down to 145 messages there. And then I'm just going to say, well, I know the email I'm looking for has got an attachment on it. So then it's come up with none. If I go to click on no and then say I want to type, I know the message has got something to do with Farzin on it, it's going to bring up just the messages with groundworks and Farzin in. So you can filter and play with your search as much as you as much as you want. That's an example where you don't know what you're looking for really, and you don't know where it's filed. Most of the time you're going to be working with a client, working on a project, and you're just going to want to see everything relating to that client. So one client I work with is called Gensler. So if I just type in Gensler here, I can see all of the correspondence with Gensler across the business, whether I've been included in it or not, which is kind of a step change from just looking at your inbox to looking at everything. And it could be somebody leaves a business and I just want to see, well, what's happened with that person. So we had somebody leave a business recently called Lawrence, and if I type in Lawrence Waldron's name, it's then going to search for all of the emails which Lawrence has been involved in and bring up where they're filed, as well as which clients obviously which clients they've been filed against. So really helpful way, because I think always when people leave a business, it's a bit of a head scratching going on in terms of what's happened and what's been said. So anyway, whether you're filing into Teams or anywhere or to a file server, this is an option to get a bit more control over your emails. But if you're trying to get more out of Teams, I think now represents a really good opportunity to just think, well, how do we consolidate all of our correspondence, not just Teams, but how do we consolidate any records which go in and out of the business, because we know that Teams is obviously used predominantly for kind of internal collaboration compared to external. I'm just going to come back to my slides quickly. So I've just done that demonstration. We're going to close for some questions now. I'm sure you'll agree with me that the content and insight Tom's provided today has been really interesting, really useful. It's definitely the kind of best webinar we've run on this topic before. And thanks for kind of coming at the subject from both angles, Tom, in terms of from an end user's perspective, trying to just get a bit more informed about how to use Teams on a day-to-day basis, as well as from a kind of an IT leadership point of view. And there's some links there which we'll send. So if you want to look at Tom's podcast or Tom's blog, then you'll receive details to that after this event. So yeah, thanks again, Tom.
No worries, good fun. Yes, it's a lot to get into one webinar. So hopefully we touched a few topics. There's been some good questions in the chat. Some of them are very specific, so we can always one-to-one afterwards. But feel free to reach out as well. Email and LinkedIn are there, so I'm happy to engage with anybody.
Okay, great. So I've just we'll take a couple of questions through here. So I'm going to go into the chat feature first. So quick one here, Tom. I don't know if this you'll definitely be a lot more informed about answering some of these than I am. So how can you share a calendar on Teams?
Yeah, so a team is a group, and a group has a calendar, so there is a calendar. Microsoft have just started surfacing those calendars in Teams to be a bit more used by the team. If you're trying to bring in somebody else's shared calendar, that's a little bit more nuanced in trying to get the Outlook calendar to appear. You can sort of tab it, but yeah, if that person wants to talk directly about what their use case is, that'd be interesting. But the main answer is there is a shared calendar for each group or team.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. One question is coming from EJ. Hi, EJ. So how can you archive project-related filed emails? So if they're already filed somewhere, then Mail Manager can just point to that location on your server, and then it will start searching them, so you don't need to refile them effectively. Most people haven't filed stuff, so we've got some bulk filing options which allow you to file either everything in your inbox or everything in a folder in one go, which is a really quick and easy way to get stuff kind of out out of a silo and into an area which is easily searchable. Another question from Natalie: how do you ensure you're not duplicating emails if two people receive the same email? Yeah, really good question. There's a deduplication feature in Mail Manager, which basically means if the same email is filed to the same place, it will just delete the duplicate copies and leave you with one. People still have to obviously read the email. It doesn't do that until the email's filed. So there is another question here. We always find the need to have, this is from Jackie. Hi, Jackie. We always find the need to have important correspondence shared with the rest of the team and also file it in the project folder for any future needs. Would teams do that? I don't know. I suppose this is maybe more, like Tom, maybe more of a question for you on maybe the sort of role and split between kind of record keeping and email and Teams, maybe. What's your sort of view on that?
Yeah, it comes back to that kind of top level question: how are you using Teams and what teams to use? So in Modality, we use a team as the DMARC for each customer. It makes it nice and easy. Anybody relating on the project can get to all that data, and anybody who isn't related to the project, it's a private team and they can't. And if we ever need to present all the data from a customer or for a customer, we know where it all is. So that's our model, but it depends on what your model is for the team in question, I think.
Okay. Another question here from Brian is: I try to set up a Teams call. Person X is someone I haven't had a Teams meeting with yet, so I add their email only to see Teams isn't accepting it, and now I have to go through several steps to add him. I think so.
Yeah. So when you're in a meeting or in a call and you're trying to add a contact, it's searching your tenant global addresses, so it's searching for other people in your tenant. It's a weird UI thing, but you'd expect to be able to pump an email in there and it say send that person an invite, and that's not the way it works. But if you're in a meeting and you right click on the three dots, it says show meeting join details, and you can copy paste the URL, the join details, the phone number, etc., so that you'd share that with them either on a direct message or an email or a text or whatever. But yeah, it's a weird quirk where if they're not in your tenant and you haven't pre-invited them, then you have to share that link for them to join into the meeting or call.
Auditing teams, sorry, not auditing teams, archiving teams. So is there, I think there's two questions really. One is like how do you archive a team? Is there an easy option to archive one? And then another one which kind of links to, I suppose, like should you be archiving teams?
Yeah, so Teams has a user level archive feature where an owner can choose to archive it. So they can click the three dots by the team name and choose archive, and it kind of puts it into a read-only state, but it's still accessible to everybody. So it's kind of a signal to users: this isn't being used anymore, but it's available for reference. But I mean, that's not an indefinite kind of a solution, because you end up with the sprawl of lots of archive teams. So we would say, if it's information you need around for a long time, is it reference information? Do you need to store it somewhere back to maybe that's your SharePoint use case there? If you need to keep it for compliance reasons, do you want to store it permanently in an archive rather than just having it as a Teams archive? And more often than not, actually, are you just avoiding the fact that there's nothing of any value in there anymore? It should be deleted. So it's a useful feature, but you also need a procedure around eventually deleting or removing that content. I wouldn't say it's a permanent archive solution.
Great. And last question from Robert, which was asked right at the top. So I recently attended a meeting and the guest speaker indicated that Teams and other similar tools, such as Slack, will replace Outlook in the coming years. What do you think?
Yeah, great question. I mean, nothing ever replaces anything, does it? We've still got customers with fax machines. So replace is a big statement. I think the tide is turning towards collaborative chat over email, but as Jacob said, there's still lots of formal comms. Certainly when we work with external customers, the majority is still email, and we work mostly in the team space. So people are getting around things like cross-tenant collaboration and guest access, and that's getting more and more popular. 5 years is a long time, so that's a reasonable horizon. But until we get rid of the last fax machine, I'm not sure we're going to get rid of Outlook anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I think it's been one of the things which we like, which has been talked about, even kind of if I go back 10 years ago when I suppose your professional business Dropbox type sites came up with it with an inbuilt messaging feature. You know, if you're in the construction industry, there's kind of common data environments and project extranets which are used for that purpose. But people still obviously revert to habit and kind of go to what they know. So I think that kind of shows, I suppose, in why Teams has taken off so well internally, but the external stuff use case isn't I suppose as easy anyway.
Yeah, emails the common denominator, and it's an open platform as well. Everybody can email everybody without any restriction, broadly speaking, apart from maybe in sort of finance and stuff. So you know it's going to work. It's going to work every time. Everybody's on the same platform, whereas Teams would rely on everybody you're collaborating with mostly also using Teams. So I think we've got a way to go, but I do think, as you say, Jacob, internally, we're definitely seeing a massive downtick on internal email, where Teams is used instead.
We've had 4 more questions come in, so I'm going to take one and probably just summarize sort of two of them, because there's been 3 or 4 questions on the kind of roadmap of when things, when will X or Y be coming in. So what's your, I suppose, what do you think is the most kind of, what things are you most excited about in terms of the future of Teams over the next year or so?
Yeah, so there's some immediate stuff coming around meeting room systems, making them a bit slicker and a bit more personal on the hardware side. On the software side, I mentioned it in the deck, bringing SharePoint intranet sites into Teams as an app. So literally your intranet appears as an app in Teams, I think is going to be really slick. And a real small feature, but something I'm excited about, is soon we'll be able to click the 3 dots on any Teams message and create a task in Microsoft To Do planner type scenarios. So being able to quickly get from a message to a task is something that I do a lot.
Great. Well, thanks again, Tom. We'll be sharing your details. So, and I'm sure you'd be kind of happy to answer any questions.
I really appreciate everybody taking the time. I'm super accessible on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff, so feel free to reach out. And yeah, some of the questions were quite specific, so if you want to get into a one-to-one around those scenarios, happy to chat.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and thank you all for joining. We look forward to getting in touch.